Okay, welcome to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're plunging headfirst into the incredibly sharp, sometimes biting, but always insightful world of Arthur Schopenhauer.
Hmm.
But forget the maybe purely gloomy philosopher image for a second. We're focusing specifically on what he had to say about literature, authors, writing style, and that, ever elusive thing called genius.
That's right. We're pulling directly from his collection of essays,
Ew.
specifically the ones gathered in The Art of Literature.
Right.
And it's a fascinating angle because Schopenhauer wasn't just like an abstract thinker. He really saw himself as a writer, a craftsman of prose.
Ah, okay.
So his views on literary form and how ideas should be presented, well, they carry the weight of his own very personal experience, both his sort of aspirations for recognition and, well, his significant frustrations with it too.
Yeah, you can really feel his personality, his own struggles kind of bleeding through in these essays, can't you? So, our mission in this deep dive is to unearth the core nuggets from his writing on this topic. What did he truly think made writing powerful versus, well, pointless?
Mm,
What were the real challenges authors faced, in his view? How did he see the difference between just reading a lot and actually thinking for yourself?
that's a big one for him.
Yeah. And what was his take on the truly rare phenomenon of genius?
We're aiming to distill these ideas into something that's useful and thought-provoking, whether you're someone who writes, someone who loves to read, or just someone curious about what makes thought impactful.
Think of this as a shortcut, maybe, to understanding one of philosophy's great critical minds, dissecting one of his favorite subjects.
Yeah.
What gives words meaning and power?
Okay, let's jump right in then. He starts right away defining literature, not just as, conveying information, but as an art. What does he mean by that exactly?
Well, he views it as an art in the sense of skill in the display of thought.
Skill.
Okay.
It's not just having profound ideas, it's the mastery of presenting them effectively. He talks about it being the right use of rules for practically exhibiting thought, whatever the subject matter is. The presentation is like intrinsically linked to the content.
And he has that brilliant line, style is the physiognomy of the mind. That feels really key for him.
Absolutely. It's a direct reflection of the author's inner world, their character, their very way of thinking. You can, in a sense, almost read the author's mind through their style.
Wow.
It's not just decoration. It is the structure of their thought made visible.
So if style is the face of the mind, what features does he think make for a good style? A powerful one. What's his ideal?
He's very clear on this and quite emphatic.
Yeah.
Clarity, definiteness, simplicity, and brevity.
Right. The essentials.
Yeah. For him, good style isn't something you just tack on. It flows naturally from having clear, true thoughts to begin with. He even quotes Horace, scribendi recte sapere est principium et font. Essentially, good sense, clear thinking, that's the source and origin of good style. The best authors, in his view, express complex ideas purely and simply. They use common words where possible, even for uncommon subjects.
By taking something really profound and making it understandable without sort of dumbing it down.
Exactly. And he points to simplicity as a definitive mark of genius. It takes immense effort and clear thinking to express deep things simply.
Which naturally leads him to savage bad style, and he does not hold back there, does he?
Not at all. He rails against obscurity, vagueness, being long-winded. He calls it prolix,
prolix.
cumbersome, affected, bombastic. He sees this bad style as often stemming from a lack of clear thought or, even worse, an attempt to hide that lack of substance. Authors are just writing simply for writing's sake, covering paper without having anything real to say. He even uses that rather wonderful French term, style empesé, for that stiff, pompous style.
Yeah.
You know the kind.
I do. Because let's be honest, it's way easier to sound intellectual by being confusing than by making something complex sound simple, isn't it?
Infinitely easier. And he really hammers home the idea that substance is paramount, not just filling pages. He quotes Hesiod, "The half is more than the whole."
Interesting.
He advises avoiding redundancy, useless amplification, anything that smells like mere rhetorical flourish.
Yeah.
His radical rule is, every word you can remove that isn't absolutely essential actually makes the writing stronger.
Every single word.
Every single word that can be spared is hurtful, he says. True brevity isn't just being short. It's saying only what's worth saying and trusting the reader to supply the obvious details.
He puts a surprising amount of responsibility on the author towards the reader, doesn't he? It's not just about expressing yourself, it's about communicating effectively.
He certainly does. He has that great image. thought travels from head to paper much more easily than from paper to head.
Huh, that's good.
The author's job is to make that return trip for the reader as smooth and effortless as possible. Avoid those horribly convoluted sentences that force the reader to piece together half phrases like they're trying to reassemble a torn letter.
Ugh, yeah. We've all read those. It sounds like it all comes back to the author's internal state then. If the style is muddy, the thinking is likely muddy too.
Exactly.
If the writing feels careless, maybe the author doesn't value their own thoughts enough to refine them.
Precisely. He sees style as a very reliable diagnostic tool for the author's mind. He believes authors should work tirelessly, almost, to the point of suffering, to find the clearest, most definite expression possible for their thoughts.
Okay, so we've talked about the mechanics of style. Let's pivot to the author themselves and, importantly, the reader. Schopenhauer has some very strong and perhaps controversial opinions here, starting with motivation.
Oh yeah, his biggest target, writing for money. He calls it the absolute ruin of literature. He argues that the best works, the truly lasting ones, are written purely for the love of the subject itself, for the intrinsic value of the truth or beauty being explored. He uses that pointed Spanish proverb, honor and money are not to be found in the same purse.
Wow. That feels like a tough stance in any era where authors need to make a living. How did he see that working out practically?
He was pretty uncompromising, honestly. He saw the pursuit of financial gain as fundamentally corrupting the pure pursuit of intellectual or artistic truth.
So just muddies the waters.
Completely. He thought it led to authors padding their work, writing on popular but shallow topics, and basically catering to the lowest common denominator, rather than pushing boundaries or seeking deeper understanding.
Okay, putting motivation aside for a moment, he also distinguishes between different types of authors based on their actual thinking process. Can you unpack that?
Yes, he lays out a kind of hierarchy. At the bottom are those who write primarily from memory or by compiling information from other books. He says this is the most numerous category.
Right, the majority.
Then come those who think while they are writing, whose thoughts are perhaps still forming on the page. And the rarest, the best, are those who think before they write.
Ah,
They have thoroughly processed and ordered their ideas before putting pen to paper.
like they've done the heavy intellectual lifting already before they even start.
Exactly. And he's particularly scathing about authors who just regurgitate what they've read without truly processing it themselves. He says the material goes straight to their fingertips without passing through their head.
Ouch.
He calls this writing a plaster cast of a cast, just copying copies without any original mold.
So just being well-read isn't enough to be a good author in his book.
Far from it. And he also warns against the tendency to assume the newest books are automatically the best, or that change in literature is always progress.
Yeah, the cult of the new.
Right. He strongly encourages readers and aspiring authors to turn to the classics, the books that have endured, because they offer the best models for the art of writing. He feels one generation alone lacks the perspective to judge an author's true, lasting merit.
And this brings us to what feels like a central point for him, something he keeps coming back to. The fundamental contrast between reading and thinking for yourself.
This is absolutely crucial to his perspective on intellectual life. He argues that reading, while necessary for acquiring knowledge, forces alien thoughts upon your mind. It makes the mind passive, losing its natural elasticity like a spring held under constant external pressure.
An interesting analogy.
Thinking for yourself, however, follows the mind's own internal impulse, directly engaging with and processing reality.
And too much reading is actually bad for your own thinking. Is that what he's saying?
He's very blunt about it. He calls excessive reading thinking with someone else's head, and arguably the safest way of having no thoughts of one's own. It can fill the head with a kind of Babylonian confusion, just a jumble of undigested ideas from others.
That's a pretty strong warning against just consuming information passively.
Yeah.
So reading is a tool, maybe, but not the destination itself.
Precisely. Knowledge acquired by thinking for yourself, he says, is integral. It's like a natural limb. You fully understand it, it's connected to everything else you know and are.
Right.
Knowledge merely learned from a book, without being processed, is artificial, like a false tooth.
A false tooth.
It's there, but it's not truly part of you.
That false tooth analogy really sticks with you, doesn't it? So it's not enough to just know the facts. You have to integrate them, make them your own.
Exactly. And he notes that thinking itself isn't something you can just switch on or off at will. It has to be kindled, he said.
Kindled.
Yeah, you have to wait for the right impulse or insight. And often that spark comes from observing and engaging with the real world around you, not just from within the pages of a book.
This distinction between reading and thinking for yourself also seems to underpin his view of different kinds of intellectuals, the man of learning versus the thinker.
Yes, men of learning are primarily readers. They accumulate vast amounts of information and ideas from books. Thinkers, on the other hand, go to the book of nature, meaning they engage directly with reality, process it through their own unique mind, and generate original insights.
I see.
He sees specialists who only focus narrowly on one area from books as potentially becoming like factory workers who only make one small part of a machine, technically skilled perhaps, but lacking broad understanding.
Tunnel vision.
Right. True intellectual culture, for him, requires broad views and the ability to connect disparate ideas through one's own thought process.
So the key is active processing and synthesis, not just accumulation. That really resonates.
Absolutely. That's the heart of thinking for oneself, according to Schopenhauer.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about what happens when an author does create something based on their clear thoughts and puts it out into the world. According to Schopenhauer, it's often not a very welcoming place. He gets into some pretty harsh realities: criticism, reputation, and envy.
He has a famously dim view, doesn't he, of the general state of criticism and the public's ability to recognize true merit. He describes true critical faculty, a genuine aesthetic sense, as a rara avis.
A rare bird.
A very rare bird indeed. It's that innate ability to recognize what is aesthetically right or true without needing rules or external validation.
And most criticism out there, in his day at least.
He saw it as often being done by those who lacked the talent to produce good work themselves. He felt censure was often excessive, and critics frequently mistook their own subjective opinions or even personal biases for universal objective judgment.
He doesn't sound very optimistic about authors getting the recognition they deserve in their own time, then.
He really wasn't. He found it a struggle himself, of course, which no doubt colored his view quite a bit. He argues the general public is uncritical and lacks discernment. They simply don't know how to distinguish the genuine from the false. He suggests many people honor classic works simply based on authority or tradition, not because they genuinely understand or appreciate them.
Just going along with the crowd. And then there's the obstacle of envy. He talks about that too.
A huge one for him. He was convinced that mediocrity forms a kind of silent conspiracy against true eminence.
Our conspiracy, wow.
He uses that incredibly biting quote, "Si quelqu'un excelle parmi nous, qu'il a excellé ailleurs." Roughly. If someone excels among us, let him go and excel elsewhere.
Goodness.
It's the idea that average people resent greatness. Modesty, he suggests, was practically invented as a protective shield against this rampant envy.
That's a pretty dark view of human nature and the literary world, but he does see a path eventually to gaining intellectual reputation. Or is it hopeless?
No, not entirely hopeless, though it's slow and circuitous. He believes that eventually the public will submit to the authority of the truly discerning few who do recognize merit.
Ah, the discerning few.
And ironically, people will then praise what is recognized, not necessarily out of genuine appreciation, but often to honor themselves. It shows they are part of the cultured group, that they are on the winning side intellectually.
So recognition happens, but often only after a significant delay, almost indirectly. It's not about the work itself for most people.
Precisely. He's deeply suspicious of quick fame. He sees it as often just mob applause, fleeting and superficial. Lasting fame, the kind that truly matters, matures slowly over time, like something that needs seasoning. Quod cito fit, cito perit.
What is done quickly perishes quickly.
Exactly. Masterpieces, he argues, require repeated inspection. They reveal more and more over time, which is why they take time to be universally appreciated.
That makes so much sense of why great minds are often misunderstood or overlooked by their own contemporaries. It takes time for the rest of us to catch up.
They are often foreign to their own age, he says. They operate at a higher stage of intellectual or cultural development than the people around them. Their light, their brilliance, is visible only from afar, either through geographical distance or, much more commonly, distance in time.
Right.
He even suggests that the true measure of an age is how it treats and receives its geniuses.
But there's a note of solace or perhaps just grim comfort in all this difficulty. Does he offer any?
He tries to offer one. He trusts that time has a way of correcting errors, burying the bad work, and eventually elevating the good. Authors shouldn't be despondent about lack of immediate recognition.
Hold on for the long game.
Basically, truth, when the facts supporting it are clear, will eventually prevail, even if it takes a very long time. He even suggests that sometimes it's better to be out of step with an age that is itself in decline.
That point about lagging behind a downward trending age feels particularly relevant today sometimes. The tide of popular opinion can definitely be wrong.
In his view, it very frequently is. Absolutely.
Okay, let's wrap up by focusing on that rare figure he sees at the pinnacle, the genius. What distinguishes this individual from everyone else in his system?
He draws a really stark dividing line. There are the millions who use their intellect primarily for what he calls the service of the belly,
Service of the belly.
essentially for practical survival, pursuing the demands of the will, like food, comfort, social status, basic needs and desires.
Got it.
And then there are the exceedingly rare few who use their head for intellect itself, for pure understanding and insight. These, he says, are the real noblesse, the true nobility of humankind.
They almost have a different kind of mind then.
He describes it as having a kind of double intellect. One part functions like everyone else's, dealing with the practicalities of life, but the other part acts as a kind of objective mirror of the world, contemplating reality without the distortion of personal desires or the will.
An objective mirror.
And their greatest creative work is the product of this objective contemplation.
And this gives them a unique kind of existence, different from the rest of us.
Yes, he calls it a second life of the intellect.
Mm.
It's a life dedicated purely to increasing knowledge and insight. And crucially, this intellectual life is often untouched by personal fate, by the ups and downs of their individual circumstances. This inner life elevates them above the common struggles and anxieties that consume most people.
I guess that's why he emphasizes leisure and solitude being so vital for them, whereas for others, maybe they're dangerous.
Absolutely invaluable. Because they find such deep, inexhaustible delight in knowledge, thought, and contemplation itself, they possess an inner resource that makes boredom, which he sees as a terror for ordinary people, almost impossible.
Right.
For those without this rich inner life, leisure can be dangerous because they have nothing to fill the void. They get restless.
Their fundamental motivation for creating seems different too, based on what you're saying.
Completely different. Genius is driven by an almost instinctual need to complete their work, to secure their unique vision for the benefit of the species, and crucially, they do this without needing external reward, applause, or even sympathy in the moment. They are compelled by the work itself. Ordinary people are driven by the immediate aims of the will. Pleasure, success, comfort, recognition, much more external.
It sounds like a solitary, maybe even lonely existence, though.
It often is. They are frequently solitary figures, sometimes even perceived as unsociable, simply because they find ordinary conversation shallow or hollow compared to their inner world of thought. He even speculates that they might have specific intellectual weak points in certain practical areas, almost as a trade-off for their unique strengths, making them perhaps less adapted to the mundane world than average people.
Interesting thought. And going back to the public's reaction, he felt people often miss the most important part of the genius's contribution, right? They focus on the wrong things.
Oh, completely. He gets quite frustrated by this. People are often more interested in the biographical details, the physical relics, the house the genius lived in, rather than actually engaging with the work itself, with the thoughts.
The substance.
Exactly. He famously compares it to spectators gaping at the scaffolding around a building instead of watching the play happening inside. Mankind is generally more interested in the matter, the theme, the personal details, the gossip, rather than the form, the actual treatment, the style, the unique intellectual contribution that makes the work great.
And so the genius, understanding this, maybe directs their energy and focus towards the future, towards posterity.
Yes. He feels contemporaries can often misunderstand or even mislead the genius. It is distance, particularly distance in time posterity, that brings together the scattered, discerning few who can truly appreciate their work for what it is.
Okay, so to try and pull all these sharp points together, Schopenhauer views literature fundamentally as an art form demanding supreme skill in displaying clear thought through clear, simple style.
Skill is key.
He's deeply skeptical of authors driven by profit and champions the vital importance of thinking for yourself over merely absorbing information from others, seeing too much reading as actually detrimental to original thought.
That false tooth idea.
Exactly. He paints a rather grim picture of the external world's reception of intellectual merit, highlighting the hurdles of uncritical publics, poor critics, and rampant envy.
The conspiracy of mediocrity.
Right. though holding on to the hope that time will eventually bring due recognition. And finally, he defines true genius as an incredibly rare state, marked by a distinct intellectual life separate from worldly desires, often solitary, driven by an intrinsic need to create for the benefit of human understanding and for posterity, often misunderstood in its own time.
That's a remarkably thorough summary of his perspective from these essays. You've nailed it.
Well, it's a powerful and, yeah, sometimes challenging view of the world of letters and intellectual life. It really makes you pause and think about your own habits, you know?
It certainly does. It forces introspection about how you consume information and whether you're truly processing it, making it your own.
And that brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe wrestle with after this deep dive. Schopenhauer suggests that most people are only thinking beings, in a very remote sense, living mainly for the struggle for existence, for the practical demands of survival and the will.
Hmm.
Given the speed of modern life, the constant fire hose of information we're subjected to, and the pervasive pressure to constantly do rather than reflect, how difficult is it truly to cultivate that second life of pure intellect and deep original thought today?
That's a heavy question.
It is, and in a world seemingly drowning in surface-level content and quick takes, is making that effort perhaps more important now than it ever has been.
Something worth considering the next time you open a book, write an email, or scroll through your feed. Definitely food for thought.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving deep with us today.